The Galactic Council chambers hummed with the familiar sound of self-satisfaction. Judge Quintara adjusted his ceremonial robes, the iridescent fabric, catching the artificial light as he gazed down at the assembled delegates, with what could only be described as smug superiority. 3 years, 3 whole years since first contact with the humans, and look how beautifully everything had worked out. Colleagues, Quintara began, his voice carrying that particular tone reserved for addressing particularly slow children. I believe we can all agree that our handling of the human situation has been nothing short of masterful. A chorus of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Thraxians clicked their mandibles approvingly. The Velkorn delegates swayed in their peculiar way of showing satisfaction. Even the normally stoic crystalloids seemed to shimmer with pleasure. Admiral Vashi, resplendent in his military dress uniform that somehow managed to look both intimidating and ridiculous at the same time, nodded gravely. Indeed, Your Honor. When we first encountered these Deathworlders, there was considerable concern about their aggressive tendencies, their history of warfare, their competitive nature, their frankly disturbing ability to survive in conditions that would kill most civilized species. And yet, Quintara continued, gesturing with one of his 4 arms toward the small section where the human delegation sat. Look at them now. Quiet, compliant, following every regulation we've put in place. They file their paperwork on time. They respect our territorial boundaries, and they haven't started a single conflict since joining our community. The human delegation consisted of exactly 3 individuals. 3. The mighty human empire, if you could even call it that, had sent 3 representatives to the most important governing body in the galaxy. It was almost insulting how little they seemed to care about galactic politics. Amy Kowalski, the lead human diplomat, sat in her designated chair, quietly scribbling notes on an actual paper pad. Paper! In an age of quantum data storage, the humans still used dead tree products to record information. She wore a simple black suit that looked positively primitive next to the elaborate ceremonial garments of the other species. Her brown hair was pulled back in what humans called a ponytail, and she had the audacity to wear something called glasses instead of using proper ocular enhancement technology. The regulations we implemented have worked perfectly, continued Admiral Vashi, warming to his subject. Restricted ship designs, limited colonization permits, mandatory peaceful conflict resolution protocols. The humans have followed every single rule without so much as a complaint. It's almost disappointing, really, chimed in Delegate Morpheus from the Andromedan Collective. We were told these creatures were dangerous, that they came from a world so hostile it would drive most species insane within hours. But look at them. They're practically docile. More laughter rippled through the chamber. Amy continued taking notes, occasionally adjusting those primitive glasses. Her 2 companions, equally unremarkable humans in equally boring suits, sat with the kind of patience that suggested they were either incredibly disciplined or incredibly bored. Judge Quintara leaned forward in his ornate chair. I must admit, I was initially concerned when our intelligence reports described their homeworld, violent weather patterns, dangerous predators, gravitational fields that would crush most of us. We thought we were dealing with natural-born killers. Instead, we got accountants. The laughter was louder this time. Even some of the more dignified species couldn't suppress their amusement. The great human threat, reduced to filing reports and asking permission for everything. They're like domestic pets now, observed Admiral Vashi with obvious satisfaction. Well-trained, obedient, and completely harmless. I dare say we've civilized them quite effectively. Amy Kowalski looked up from her notes for the first time during the session. She raised her hand politely, waiting to be recognized like a student in class. Yes? Quintara said, his tone suggesting he was doing her an enormous favor by acknowledging her existence. Thank you, Your Honor, Amy said in perfectly accented galactic standard. I have a small request regarding colonization rights. Of course you do, muttered someone from the Zephyrian section, causing another wave of chuckles. Amy smiled pleasantly. My government would like to request permission to establish a small agricultural colony in the Sol 7-49 system. It's currently uninhabited, and listed as "let me check my notes," worthless for any practical purpose, in the Galactic Registry. Judge Quintara didn't even bother consulting his advisors. Sol 7429, that barren wasteland. My dear human, that system consists of nothing but radiation-blasted rocks and gas giants. The primary star is unstable, the asteroid fields are treacherous, and there isn't a single habitable planet in the entire system. We understand the challenges, Your Honor. Humans are quite adaptable to difficult environments. We were hoping to try our hand at what we call subsistence farming and perhaps some small-scale mining operations. Admiral Vashi practically rolled his eyes. Mining? In Sol 7049? The mineral surveys show nothing but common elements. Iron, silicon, carbon compounds, nothing of any real value. That's perfectly suitable for our needs, Amy replied with that same pleasant smile. We're not looking for anything exotic, just basic materials for simple construction and agriculture. The various delegates exchanged glances that clearly said, "Look how pathetic they are." Here was the human delegation, asking permission to scrape out a living on worthless rocks in a system no one else wanted. It was almost sad. "Well," Judge Quintara said magnanimously, "I see no reason to deny such a modest request. The system is indeed worthless, and if the humans want to waste their time and resources trying to grow vegetables on airless rocks, that's their prerogative." "Motion approved," Admiral Vashi announced, without even calling for a vote. "The humans may proceed with their agricultural experiment in Thank you so much," Amy said, making another note on her paper pad. "This means a great deal to us." As the session moved on to more important matters, like trade agreements between actual civilizations and territorial disputes that mattered, Amy Kowalski continued taking her notes. Occasionally she would glance up at the various speakers with what looked like polite interest. None of the assembled delegates noticed that her notes were actually detailed behavioral observations. None of them realized that her questions about regulations were mapping out legal loopholes, and absolutely none of them suspected that the worthless Sol 7429 system was located at the perfect strategic position to monitor traffic between three major galactic trade routes. But then again, why would they? The humans were so well behaved, so compliant, so perfectly civilized. What could possibly go wrong? 6 months after the Sol 7229 approval, Moran was beginning to regret ever taking the position of Thraxian Trade Minister. His mandibles clicked irritably as he stared at yet another stack of human paperwork that had materialized on his desk overnight. The humans, it seemed, had discovered bureaucracy, and they were using it like a weapon of mass annoyance. "Morton," he called to his assistant, who scuttled in with the harried look of someone who'd been dealing with human requests all morning. "Yes, Minister Moran." Morton's smaller mandibles twitched nervously. "How many forms have the humans submitted this week?" Morton consulted his datapad with the expression of someone delivering bad news. 237, sir. And it's only Wednesday." Moran's primary eyes bulged slightly. 237? For what? "Well, there's the application for expanded mining rights in Sol 7049, the request for shipping lane modifications to accommodate their agricultural vessels, the permits for establishing what they call research stations throughout the system, the forms for cultural preservation sites, the environmental impact assessments, the safety protocols documentation, the equipment transport authorizations," and Morton paused to breathe. 17 different requests for what they term recreational facilities. The sound that emerged from Moran's throat could only be described as a growl. Recreational facilities? On a bunch of airless rocks. At that moment, Commander Tom Marley appeared in the doorway, carrying what appeared to be another stack of documents. The human male was tall by their species standards, with graying hair and what humans called a mustache. He wore the same boring suit style as all human officials, though Moran noted with growing irritation that the man always looked perfectly pressed and professional, even after hours of bureaucratic warfare. Minister Moran. Perfect timing. Tom's smile was so genuinely friendly that it made Moran's mandibles ache. "I have a few more permits I'd like to discuss." "A few more?" Moran gestured at the mountain of papers on his desk. Commander Marley, you've submitted enough paperwork to build a small space station. Funny you should mention that, Tom said, his smile widening. That's actually one of our requests. We'd like to establish a small orbital platform for coordinating our agricultural operations. Nothing fancy, just a basic structure for managing supply chains and communications. Morton made a strangled sound. Supply chains? For farming? Oh yes, Tom nodded earnestly. Modern agriculture is quite complex. We need proper logistics networks to ensure efficient distribution of seeds, fertilizers, harvesting equipment, processing facilities. You'd be amazed at how much infrastructure goes into growing a simple tomato. Morin rubbed his compound eyes with 2 of his 6 arms. Commander, when we approved your colonization request, we assumed you meant a few families with some basic farming tools. Well, we do want to do this properly, Tom replied, settling into a chair that groaned slightly under his Deathworld-adapted bone density. Which brings me to our next request. We'd like permission to transport some traditional Earth farming equipment to Sol. What kind of equipment? Moran asked. Though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to know, Tom consulted his datapad. Standard agricultural machinery, really. Plows, harvesters, irrigation systems, earth-moving equipment, atmospheric processors. Atmospheric processors, Morton squeaked. The planets don't have atmospheres. Exactly the problem we're trying to solve, Tom said with that maddening human reasonableness. We'll need to establish proper growing conditions. It's all very standard terraforming technology. Nothing military about it, I assure you. Morin's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. And I suppose you have forms for all of this. Naturally, Tom produced another stack of documents. Environmental modification permits, atmospheric engineering licenses, soil composition alteration requests, weather control system authorizations. We want to make sure everything is completely legal and above board. Weather control systems. Moran's voice had risen to what humans would call a shriek. For optimal crop yields, Tom explained patiently. Rain schedules, wind patterns, temperature regulation. Modern farming requires precise environmental control. We can't just scatter some seeds and hope for the best. Morton was frantically making notes. How many pieces of this farming equipment are we talking about? Oh, not too many. Maybe 15,000 units to start with. We're thinking of expanding our operations gradually, you understand. Don't want to overwhelm the system's infrastructure. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Moran's mandibles grinding together. 15,000 units? Give or take. We also have some recreational vehicles we'd like to bring along. Humans get quite stressed without proper recreational opportunities, and stressed farmers make poor decisions. Recreational vehicles, Moran repeated, in a voice that suggested his sanity was hanging by a thread. Nothing elaborate, just some basic transportation for off-duty personnel. All-terrain vehicles, atmospheric craft, maybe a few submarine units for exploring any water sources we might find or create. Standard recreational equipment, submarines? For recreation? Fishing is very popular among humans, Tom said seriously. Good for morale, and we might want to establish some artificial lakes for aesthetic purposes. Morton looked like he was about to faint. How big are these recreational vehicles? Tom waved a hand dismissively. Various sizes, some are quite compact, maybe 50 meters long. Others are a bit larger, perhaps 200 meters. It depends on how many crew members need recreation at once. 200-meter recreational vehicles? Moran's voice cracked. Well, humans are social creatures. We like to recreate in groups. And some of our recreational activities require quite a bit of space. Sports, games, cultural events. You know how it is. Actually, neither Moran nor Morting knew how it was, since most civilized species didn't require military-sized vessels for their hobbies. Commander Marley, Moran said slowly, are you absolutely certain all of this equipment is for farming and recreation? Tom's expression was the picture of innocent confusion. What else would it be for? Minister Moran, I hope you're not suggesting that we humans would misrepresent our intentions to this honorable council. The way he said it made it clear that such an accusation would be a serious diplomatic incident. Moran found himself in the peculiar position of being afraid to ask the obvious questions. No, of course not, Moran muttered. It's just quite a lot of equipment for a simple agricultural colony. We believe in doing things properly, Tom replied with that same infuriating smile. After all, if you're going to farm, why not farm efficiently? As Tom left with his approved permits, Moran turned to Morting with the expression of someone who'd just been run over by a cargo hauler. Morting? Yes, sir. Why do I have the feeling we've just been expertly manipulated by someone pretending to be a farmer? Morting looked at the massive pile of approved human requests. Because we have, sir. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Moran stared at the forms for a long moment. Approve them. What else can we do? It's all completely legal, properly documented, and utterly reasonable, assuming you believe that humans need 200-meter submarines to catch fish. And if they don't actually intend to catch fish, sir? Moran's mandibles clicked once, slowly. Then Morton, we've just helped the humans build the most well-documented invasion fleet in galactic history. But surely that's impossible. They're just farmers after all. Neither of them sounded particularly convinced. General Krufnog stared at the holographic display with the expression of someone watching paint dry on a particularly boring wall. 18 months of monitoring human activities in Sol 749, and the most exciting thing they'd observed was what humans apparently called a barbecue party. Admiral Drawhorn, he said to his fleet commander, gesturing at the surveillance data with one of his tentacles, remind me again why we're dedicating valuable intelligence resources to watching humans grow vegetables. Admiral Drawhorn, a distinguished Velkorn whose species prided itself on military precision, rippled his bioluminescent patches in what passed for a shrug. Council orders, General. After the humans submitted all that paperwork for their farming equipment, some paranoid voices suggested we should monitor their activities. And what exactly have we learned from this extensive surveillance operation? Drawhorn consulted his datapad with the enthusiasm of someone reading tax regulations. Well, sir, we've confirmed that humans are indeed farming. They've established 17 agricultural settlements across 4 different asteroids. They've built homes, recreational facilities, and what appear to be community gathering spaces. They hold regular social events, play various games, and seem to spend an inordinate amount of time cooking food outdoors over open flames. Barbecues, Krufnog muttered. The most terrifying military activity known to the galaxy. Indeed, sir. They also appear to be obsessed with something called potatoes. Our linguistics department estimates that 37% of their recorded communications involve discussions about potato cultivation, potato recipes, or potato storage methods. General Krufnog's primary eye stalk swiveled to regard his subordinate. Potatoes? Root vegetables, sir. Apparently a staple food crop from their homeworld. They've established extensive potato farms on each settlement, and seem genuinely excited about their harvest yields. The general's other eye stalks drooped in a display of profound boredom. Anything else of note? Some of their transport vessels are rather large, Drawhorn admitted, but our analysts believe this is simply due to human preferences for comfort and luxury. They seem to require extensive living quarters, recreational spaces, and storage areas for their agricultural equipment. How large are we talking? The biggest ones are approximately 2 kilometers long, sir. Krufnog's eye stalks perked up slightly. 2 kilometers? For farming? Well, sir, they claim these are multi-purpose agricultural support vessels. They need space for crop storage, processing facilities, living quarters for farming families, schools for their children, recreational areas. Humans apparently require quite a bit of space for their quality of life standards. And we believe this? Admiral Drawhorn's patches flickered in what might have been uncertainty. Sir, what else could they be? Our scans show agricultural machinery, food storage, living quarters, recreational facilities, exactly what you'd expect from a civilian farming operation. Admittedly, some of their equipment generates unusual energy signatures, but human technology has always been rather inefficient. At that moment, their communications officer announced an incoming transmission from the inspection team currently visiting Sol 749. General Krafnog accepted the call, and the face of Inspector Volan appeared on the hologram, looking distinctly unimpressed. Inspector Volan, what's your assessment of the human operations? Volan, a methodical Andromedan, with the personality of a particularly dull rock, consulted his notes. General Krafnog, I'm pleased to report that our fears about human military activities were completely unfounded. These people are laughably primitive. Explain. Sir, I've been here for 3 days and I've watched humans engage in activities that can only be described as aggressively mundane. This morning I observed a human named Brandon Torres spend 4 hours teaching a group of children how to identify different types of soil. Yesterday I watched a community meeting where the most heated debate was about the optimal spacing for potato rows. General Krofenug found himself oddly disappointed. And their equipment? Basic agricultural machinery, sir. Admittedly, some of it is larger than strictly necessary, but humans seem to believe that bigger is better. Their atmospheric processors are just oversized air recycling units. Their earth-moving equipment is exactly that. Machines for moving dirt around. I watched them use a 100-ton excavator to dig drainage ditches for a potato field. What about those energy signatures our sensors detected? Inspector Volan actually laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Sir, human technology is so inefficient it's almost comical. They use massive fusion reactors to power systems that any civilized species could run on a simple battery pack. Their research stations are consuming enough energy to power a small city, and they're using it to monitor soil moisture levels and crop growth patterns. Admiral Drahorn leaned forward. Inspector, you're certain there's nothing suspicious about their activities? Admiral, unless you consider excessive enthusiasm for root vegetables to be a security threat, I can assure you the humans pose no danger to anyone except possibly themselves. They're so focused on their farming that they barely seem aware of the strategic implications of their location. Strategic implications? General Krafnog asked. Well, sir, Sol 749 does sit at the intersection of 3 major trade routes, but the humans seem oblivious to this fact. They're more concerned with crop rotation schedules than shipping lane traffic. Yesterday I mentioned that their system provides an excellent view of Thraxian commercial traffic, and Brandon Torres asked if that meant they might be able to trade potatoes with passing merchant ships. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of General Krafnog's tentacles drumming against his command chair. Inspector Volan, have you observed any activities that could possibly be construed as military in nature? Well, sir, they do conduct regular drills. Both Krafnog and Drahorn straightened. What kind of drills? Fire safety drills, sir. Apparently humans are quite concerned about the possibility of kitchen fires spreading to their potato storage facilities. They practice evacuation procedures and fire suppression techniques with military precision. It's actually rather impressive how seriously they take potato safety. General Krafnog felt a headache developing. Anything else? They've established what they call communication networks throughout the system, but these appear to be primarily used for coordinating harvest schedules and sharing recipes. Oh, and they've set up monitoring stations to track asteroid movements, but they claim this is to protect their farming settlements from potential impacts. And you believe these explanations? Inspector Valen's voice carried the confidence of someone who'd thoroughly investigated the situation. General, I've spent 3 days watching humans argue about fertilizer composition and debate the merits of different potato varieties. If this is all an elaborate deception, then humans are the greatest actors in the galaxy. But honestly, sir, I think they're just really into farming. After ending the transmission, General Krafnog turned to Admiral Drahorn with an expression of profound disappointment. So, Admiral, it appears our dangerous Deathworld warriors have become potato farmers. It would seem so, sir. And their massive ships are for comfort. Apparently so, sir. And their energy-intensive equipment is just inefficient. That's the assessment, sir. General Krafnog slumped in his command chair. Well then, I suppose we can downgrade the Sol 749 situation from potential security threat to minor agricultural curiosity. Shall I recall our surveillance units, sir? Leave one monitoring station in place. We might as well keep an eye on them, if only to learn about potato cultivation techniques. Neither of them noticed that every single human farmer they'd observed had been military trained. Neither of them realized that the children learning soil identification were actually studying camouflage and concealment techniques, and neither of them suspected that Brandon Torres, the enthusiastic potato farmer, was actually a former Special Forces operative who could recite the specifications of every alien warship in the galaxy from memory. But then again, who would suspect farmers of being dangerous? The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called at 0347 hours, Galactic Standard Time. Judge Quintara had never seen the chamber filled with such a mixture of panic, confusion, and what could only be described as existential terror. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across faces that belonged to species who hadn't experienced genuine fear in centuries. Quartermaster A, the Galactic Fleet's chief supply officer, stood at the central podium with the expression of someone who'd just watched their entire worldview collapse in real time. His usual composure had been replaced by something that resembled barely controlled hysteria. "Honorable delegates," he began, his voice cracking slightly, "I regret to inform you that we have been comprehensively deceived by the human colonists in..." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Judge Quintara leaned forward, his ceremonial robes rustling. "Quartermaster, surely you're being overly dramatic. We've been monitoring their activities for over a year. They're farmers." "Your Honor, Quartermaster," I replied, consulting his datapad with shaking hands, "they are absolutely not farmers." Admiral Vesey rose from his seat, his military bearing intact, despite the early hour. "Quartermaster, explain yourself. Our intelligence reports clearly indicate agricultural activities, residential settlements, and recreational facilities. What exactly are you suggesting?" "Quartermaster." They activated the chamber's main holographic display. What appeared was a detailed schematic of the Sol 749 system, but not as they'd ever seen it before. The agricultural settlements were highlighted in red, connected by an intricate network of what could only be described as defensive positions. "Admiral Vesey, those farming colonies are fully militarized bases. Each one is positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire across all major approach vectors to the system. What we interpreted as community gathering spaces are actually command bunkers designed to withstand direct orbital bombardment." The chamber erupted in stunned voices. Delicate Morpheus from the Andromedan Collective stood up so quickly he knocked over his chair. "That's impossible. We've seen their activities. They grow vegetables." "They do grow vegetables, Quartermaster," I confirmed grimly. "But those potato storage facilities," our inspector admired. "They're ammunition depots. The potatoes are real, but they're grown in the top 3 meters of soil. Everything below that level is military hardware." Judge Quintara's forearms began gesturing frantically. But, the inspections. Inspector Volan reported nothing but agricultural equipment. Inspector Volan saw exactly what the humans wanted him to see. "Quartermaster." They continued advancing to the next hologram. "Those atmospheric processes that we mocked for being oversized and inefficient. They're shield generators, the massive energy signatures we dismissed as human technological incompetence. Those are weapons charging stations operating at minimum power levels." Admiral Vesey's face had gone pale. "The recreational vehicles? Assault craft. Every single one of them. Those submarines for fishing that Commander Marley requested. They're stealth attack vessels capable of operating in any environment, atmospheric, aquatic or vacuum. The all-terrain recreational vehicles are armored assault platforms. The larger recreational craft for group activities are troop transports designed to carry full combat squads." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, a delegate from the Zephyrian sector managed to speak. How do we know this?" Quartermaster A's expression grew even grimmer. "Because 12 hours ago, every single human research station in Sol 749 simultaneously activated what we now know are the most sophisticated sensor arrays ever constructed. In the span of 6 minutes they had mapped every ship movement, communication frequency, and defensive position in a 30-light-year radius. But that's, Admiral Vashi started, then stopped as the implications hit him. Impossible with their technology? Admiral, we've been operating under the assumption that human technology is primitive and inefficient. What if we were wrong? What if their inefficiency was deliberate misdirection? Judge Quintara's voice came out as barely a whisper. What are you saying? I'm saying, Your Honor, that while we've been congratulating ourselves on taming the dangerous humans, they've been building the most strategically positioned military installation in the galaxy, and they did it by asking politely and filing the proper paperwork. The holographic display shifted to show communication intercepts. Lines of data scrolled past, showing coordinated activities across the entire human colony network. Furthermore, Quartermaster A continued, our analysis suggests they've been monitoring our communications from the beginning. Every council session, every military briefing, every diplomatic exchange, they've been listening to all of it. Delegate Morpheus sank back into his chair. They've been 3 steps ahead of us this entire time. Not 3 steps, Delegate. More like 10 steps. While we were debating whether to allow them to bring farming equipment, they were already planning defensive strategies. While we were mocking their inefficient technology, they were developing weapons systems that make our fleet look like antique museum pieces. Admiral Vashi's military mind was the first to grasp the full scope of the situation. Quartermaster, what's their current military capacity? Unknown, sir. But based on the energy outputs we're detecting now that their systems are fully active, substantial. Very substantial. How substantial? Quartermaster, I hesitated for a moment before answering. Sir, if they wanted to, they could probably disable our entire defense grid within hours. The chamber fell silent except for the sound of various species having what humans would call nervous breakdowns. Judge Quintara finally found his voice. But they asked for permission. They followed all our rules. They were so polite about everything. Yes, Your Honor, they were extremely polite. Right up until they had everything in place. What changed? Why are we learning about this now? Quartermaster consulted his datapad one final time. Because, Your Honor, they're done hiding. As of 6 hours ago, the humans transmitted a message to all Galactic Council members. It's quite brief. What does it say? It says, thank you for your patience during our settlement period. We're ready to renegotiate our relationship with the Galactic Council at your earliest convenience. It's signed by Amy Kowalski, who apparently is not just a diplomat, but the commander of something called the Human Colonial Defense Force. The silence stretched on until Admiral Vashi finally spoke the question everyone was thinking. Quartermaster, in your professional opinion, what exactly have we helped them build? Quartermaster A looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations, species who had dominated space for millennia, who had never encountered a threat they couldn't handle or a problem they couldn't solve. Admirals, delegates, Your Honor, he said quietly, I believe we have just assisted the humans in constructing the most formidable military fortress in galactic history. And they did it by pretending to be farmers who really loved potatoes. Judge Quintara slumped in his ornate chair, his ceremonial robes suddenly feeling like a costume from a play that had ended badly. So, he said finally, when you said they weren't playing nice? I said they weren't playing nice, Your Honor. I never said they weren't playing smart. The holographic display flickered and changed to show a new image, Amy Kowalski, sitting in what was clearly a military command center, wearing a crisp uniform instead of her usual diplomatic suit. She was smiling that same pleasant smile she'd worn during all those council sessions. But now, nobody found it reassuring. Now it looked like the smile of someone who had just won a game that nobody else had realized they were playing. The emergency session had been in chaos for exactly 17 minutes, when the chamber's main doors opened with a soft pneumatic hiss. Amy Kowalski walked in, but this was not the same quietly polite diplomat who had sat in the back taking notes for the past 3 years. Gone was the simple black suit, replaced by a crisp military uniform that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Gone were the primitive glasses and the meek posture. What walked into the Galactic Council chambers was clearly a predator who had finally decided to stop pretending to be prey. She moved with the fluid confidence of someone who owned every space she entered, and behind her followed Commander Tom Marley and Brandon Torres, both also in military dress. The transformation was so complete that several delegates had to look twice to confirm these were the same humans they'd been dismissing for years. "Please don't let me interrupt," Amy said, her voice carrying easily through the vast chamber without any apparent effort. "I understand you were discussing our agricultural projects." Judge Quintara's forearms trembled slightly as he tried to maintain some semblance of authority. "Miss Commander Kowalski, we were just receiving some concerning reports about activities in Sol 7. Amy's smile was radiant. "Oh, those aren't concerning reports, Your Honor. Those are graduation announcements." "Graduation?" Admiral Vashi managed to croak. "From our agricultural phase to our, shall we say, more traditional occupations." Amy walked to the center of the chamber with the casual confidence of someone addressing a room full of particularly slow students. "You see, we've completed our 3-year study of galactic civilization, and we've learned so much." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of various species hyperventilating in their own unique ways. "Study?" Delegate Morpheus whispered. "Oh yes. You didn't think we actually needed 3 years to grow potatoes, did you?" Amy's laugh was warm and genuinely amused. "We're humans. We conquered our homeworld in a few thousand years. We figured out basic agriculture a long time ago." Commander Marley stepped forward, consulting what appeared to be the same boring datapad he'd always carried. "Our agricultural operations served multiple purposes. Food production, certainly, but more importantly they provided excellent cover for our primary mission: comprehensive analysis of galactic military capabilities, political structures, economic systems, and social hierarchies." Brandon Torres, the former farmer, added with a grin that would have made a shark nervous. "Plus we really do make excellent potatoes. You should try them sometime, assuming you're still in a position to appreciate cuisine after today." Judge Quintara found his voice, though it came out several octaves higher than usual. What do you want?" Amy's expression shifted, and for the first time, the assembled delegates saw something that made their various forms of skin crawl. It wasn't anger or hatred. It was the look of a teacher who was disappointed in a particularly obtuse class. "Your Honor, I think you're asking the wrong question. The question isn't what we want. The question is what you're prepared to offer in exchange for our continued agricultural focus." Admiral Vashi's military training finally kicked in. "Are you threatening us?" "Admiral," Amy said gently, "threats are what you make when you're not in a position of strength. We're not threatening anyone, we're simply clarifying the current situation." At that moment, every communication device in the chamber began chiming simultaneously. Emergency alerts, priority messages, and what sounded suspiciously like panic were flooding in from across the galaxy. Amy glanced at her own communication device with mild interest. "Ah, right on schedule. Admiral Vashi, I believe your fleet commanders are trying to contact you. Something about detecting massive signatures around your homeworld." The color drained from Admiral Vashi's face as he activated his emergency communicator. The voice that emerged was tight with barely controlled terror. "Admiral, unknown vessels have appeared in orbit around Valcorna Prime. Hundreds of them. They just materialized out of nowhere. Stealth technology beyond anything we've ever seen. They're not responding to hails, but they're powering weapon systems." Similar reports began flooding in from delegates across the chamber. Every major world, every fleet base, every significant installation in the galaxy was suddenly surrounded by human vessels that had apparently been hiding in plain sight. Amy nodded approvingly. "Excellent timing. Our logistics coordinators will be pleased." "How?" Judge Quintara's voice was barely a whisper. How long have we been surrounded?" "About 2 years," Amy replied conversationally. "We established our Sol 7329 base first, naturally, but that was always intended as a coordination center, not our primary force deployment. While you were watching us grow vegetables, we were positioning assets throughout the galaxy." Commander Marley looked up from his datapad. Our recreational submarines proved particularly effective at deep space reconnaissance. Turns out your sensor grids have some interesting blind spots. But Admiral Vashi struggled to understand. But we monitored your supply lines. Your shipping manifests. We tracked every vessel. Oh, you tracked every vessel we wanted you to track, Brandon said cheerfully. The ones labeled agricultural supplies and farming equipment. Funny thing about stealth technology though. If you're not looking for it, you tend not to find it. Amy stepped closer to the central podium, and every delegate in the chamber instinctively leaned back. Here's what you all failed to understand about humans, she said, her voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a lecture. You mistook our patience for weakness. You mistook our compliance for submission, and most critically, you mistook our willingness to follow your rules for an inability to break them. We are Deathworlders, she continued, and for the first time her smile showed teeth. We come from a planet that tried to kill us in every possible way for millions of years. We survived ice ages, supervolcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts and predators that make your worst nightmares look like house pets. Do you really think we were intimidated by paperwork? Judge Quintara's ceremonial robes were now visibly damp with perspiration. What are your terms? Our terms are simple, Amy replied. We're dissolving the current power structure of the Galactic Council. From now on, humanity will have equal representation in all decisions affecting galactic civilization. We'll be establishing new trade agreements, new territorial boundaries, and new rules of engagement. And if we refuse? Admiral Vashi asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer. Amy's smile widened. Admiral, you're welcome to refuse. But I should mention that every single one of your military installations is currently targeted by weapon systems that were designed by a species that spent thousands of years figuring out increasingly creative ways to kill things. We've had 3 years to study your defensive capabilities, and frankly we're not impressed. The chamber fell silent except for the continuing stream of panicked communications from across the galaxy. You see, Amy continued, you've been thinking about this all wrong. You thought you were dealing with a primitive species that needed to be civilized and controlled. But we were never primitive, we were just learning. She gestured toward the holographic display which now showed the true scope of human military deployment across the galaxy. We studied your technologies and improved on them. We analyzed your tactics and countered them. We observed your political structures and identified their weaknesses. And most importantly, we learned exactly how much you underestimate anyone who doesn't fit your definition of civilized. Commander Miley stepped forward with a document that looked suspiciously like another permit request. The new galactic governance structure is outlined here. Naturally, we've prepared all the proper paperwork. Amy's laugh filled the chamber, and it was a sound that somehow managed to be both genuinely amused and utterly terrifying. After all, she said, we wouldn't want to be accused of not following proper procedures. As the assembled delegates of the galaxy's former ruling powers stared at the humans who had outmaneuvered them so completely, Judge Quintara asked the question that everyone was thinking. How long have you been planning this? Amy Kowalski, commander of the Human Colonial Defense Force, former diplomatic attaché, and graduate of the most dangerous educational institution in the galaxy, namely, Planet Earth, looked around the chamber one final time. Your Honor, she said with that same pleasant smile that had fooled them all for 3 years, we've been planning this since the moment we realized you thought you could control us. Welcome to the new Galactic Order. We hope you find our leadership style educational.